Hey everybody, I'm Jack Rita with Future Pastimes. I am the designer of Firefly and Misbehavin, which is a factions deck building game set in the Firefly verse, which is available now, so go get it. I'm going to be talking about the different factions in a series of videos. Today we're going to be talking about the Alliance. So they are one of the 4 playable factions in the game. You have the Alliance, you have Eavesdown, which is Badger's criminal enterprise. You have Niska, which is a different, arguably worse criminal enterprise. And then you have Serenity, early Serenity. You're starting with Mal and Zoe and Serenity, building a crew and going about your way. So the Alliance is one of the 4 factions. So we'll take a look at what is in their starting deck of 10 cards. Each faction starts with 10 cards unique to their faction. And then there are cards in a market, which is composed of the 3 different areas of space, core, border, and rim, as well as a separate board with stacks of supply cards. Cards in the market are each unique. Like the supply, you have multiple copies of the same card. So the starting deck for the Alliance, you have 4 characters to start with. So you have Commander Harkin there. You have Agent McGinnis. You have an ensign from one of the episodes, radio operator. You have 2 core space cards. You have a Cortex access device. You have 2 Alliance Marines. And then you have the Tohoku class cruiser, which is one of their best cards. It's got 6 defense, 3 power. It can be used in a fight, and it's a ship, which means you can play maneuvers while you have that in play. So let's talk about how to leverage this starting deck and make the most of it, and talk about what other cards you might want to add to your deck to help you get to the victory condition. So Firefly Misbehavin has what's called a standard victory condition, and that is where, if you look at the player boards here, you'll have in the top corner here the amount of power that you need to start your turn with, and that's going to be depending on the number of players in play. So in a 2-player game, you're going to start with 13 power. It's 11 in a 4-player game, and so on. And just a little bit about the player board here. Your tableau is composed of these 2 areas. The top row is your asset area, where you will play cards that are assets, and then the bottom row is your command area for characters and items. And the Alliance can have up to 3 characters or up to 3 items. That middle space lets you know that can be either. So they have some limitations, but they also have the most spaces overall. So all the boards are not all identical from one faction to the next. The Eavesdown one has the fewest number of spaces, but they have the most flexibility in their command area, where each space can be either a character or an item. So the Alliance has room for more assets on average, and a lot of area in their command area to put cards. Let's talk about influence first of all. So influence is basically what you use to buy new cards to add to your deck, and influence is going to be the purple number that is at the bottom of the card. So you can see here that Harkin has 2 influence, and the influence is going to be underneath the cost. So that's the cost. If we were going to buy Harkin, if he were at the market for sale to add to a deck, he would cost 4 influence, and there's 2 influence there. So each starting deck in Misbehavin has 6 influence in it. But the Alliance is a little bit different. They actually can have more than 6. They can have 7, but for them it's a little bit tricky. So the other factions, they just have a number of cards with influence that will equal up to 6. And that's true to a certain degree for the Alliance. So we saw that Harkin has 2 influence. Agent McGinnis has 1 influence, so that's 3 right there. And then the only other cards that they have in their deck with influence are these 2 core space cards. But you can see that their influence is an X, and the X equals, the influence of this card is equal to the number of other core space cards in play. So let's talk about how that works. works. They have the 2 core space cards here. So if you have one of them is in your display area, you've played it and it's in play on your board, that counts as in play. But also if you play it to the display area. So you can see right at the top here of the board, it says display area, and that's actually this area that's off of the board. So up here on the table, that's your display area. And cards that you play to your display area, once their effect is resolved, they are discarded. So they don't stay around, they go away afterwards. And supply cards return to the supply. Other cards in your deck just go into your what's called your recycle area. So you discard them and you'll draw them again later on. So the display area is not part of what's known as your tableau. Those are your cards on the play mat. But if you have core space on the board or the display area, those both count as in play. So if you have one card in the display area, it says it's worth the number of other core space cards in play. And so if that's the only one, then this one's actually worth 0. By itself, core space has no influence. It's very little value. So if you have one of them on your board and you have the other one in the display area, this one in the display area is worth the number of other core space cards in play, so that would be 1. If you put them both into the display area, then that would be 2 influence total, because this one is worth this one, and vice versa. So that's 2, plus the 2 from Harkin, plus the 1 from Agent McGinnis is 5. And I promised that all of the decks had at least 6 influence. So how do we get at least up to 6? Well, let's go back to that Tohoku class cruiser. So I told you it's one of their most powerful cards. Well, the effect down here says this card counts as a core space card when played or moved to your display area with another core space card. But this card has 0 influence. So it's got a 0 on there. It is always going to be worth 0. So this card will never itself have influence, but it basically boosts your core space cards because it counts as 1. So if you have the cruiser and a core space in your display area, you have a total of 1 influence because this core space card is worth the number of other core spaces, which this counts as 1. So this card is worth 1. Remember, this is always going to be 0. So that's 1. If you've got these 2 cards in your display area and you have your other core space card in play, then this is going to give you 2 influence because the core space card that's in your display area is worth the number of other core space cards in play. 2 more in play, that's 2 influence. But if you have all 3 of these cards in your display area, then you have 4 influence because each core space card is going to be worth 2. So that's 4 plus the 2 for Harkin is 6 plus 1 more for McGinnis. That's 7. So the Alliance technically has more influence in their starting deck than the other 3 factions. But, you know, the Alliance is really big, and it's a bureaucratic nightmare, and bureaucracies move very slowly. So it's not always easy for the Alliance to maneuver all these things in order to get to their maximum amount of influence, and that is by design. So in order to really take advantage of that, you want to optimize your draws. So when you're drawing your 5 cards at the end of each of your turn, you want to optimize what is going to be drawn. In an early game, you are most of the time trying to optimize it so that you're drawing influence, so that you can then acquire more and better cards to add to your deck. You need the influence. If you're drawing a hand full of Marines with 2 zeros in their influence and the Cortex access device 0 and these 2 guys 0, you're not going to have enough influence to do anything. So part of the beauty of how Firefly Misbehavin works is every turn you can basically play a card down to your play board. And when it's in your board, it's not in your deck, which means when you're drawing cards from your deck, you're not going to draw the cards that you have played. So I like to play cards that have 0 influence down into the tableau in the early part of the game. You want to get those out of your deck so that when you're replenishing your deck, you're drawing more influence. Now, one of the other ways that you can optimize that is, let's say that on a turn, you've drawn your 5 cards and you have 1 core space card, but you don't have the other one and you don't have the cruiser. That core space card by itself, again, is worth nothing. It's by itself. You can't use it, but you can play it to your tableau in what I like to call banking a card for its influence. So that card by now is no good, but if you put it into your tableau on your next turn, when you draw the other core space card or the Tohoku class cruiser, or preferably both, you can still use the card that you played. And that's part of the beauty of the design here, is if you put a card into your tableau and you leave it there at the end of your turn, and your next turn when you start, it's there. And cards that are in your tableau can be moved to the display area in order to use them for their influence or for other effects. So you can put that card down knowing that you can't use it this turn, but you can use it on your next turn. And I typically like to have one of my core space cards in the tableau early, and I may leave it there for a long time. I might say, you know what, I'm going to operate on only having 5 influence for a lot of the first turns. And then if I needed one more influence, or again, when you've got that combination of I've got both core space and the cruiser, that's going to be more than +1 that you're adding in there. So occasionally it's something will come up in the market that you're like, wow, I really want to get that. Like for instance, in the Rim deck, there's another Tohoku class cruiser. And if you can get both of those as the alliance, you are really setting yourself up to win the game. And I'll talk about one of the ways that is going to make it easier for you to do that using verse tokens. So in general, the alliance deck is a little bit handicapped with influence. So when I'm looking to add cards to my deck, I'm really looking for cards that have influence. Now, the easiest and cheapest one to get is the shiny card. And a shiny card is a supply card. It only costs 2 influence. And its main effect, it has multiple effects, but its main effect is it gives you 2 influence that you can use for recruitment. So I like to pick up a few of those early in the game. And when you are struggling to put together a good amount of influence, you can usually get 2. So get those supply cards. As a rule of thumb, when I draw a hand, if I see that I've got 4 influence, I'm looking to spend all 4 of that to pick up a card to add to my deck, especially if it has influence as well. I try not to waste a good draw of influence, because there's going to be turns where you only draw 2 influence, and then you don't really have that much of a choice about what you get. So when you get more than 2, typically you want to spend all of it to get something better. But at a minimum, you should be able to pick up those shinies, and keep your eyes out for those other cards like characters and items and stuff that have influence on their own. That's when you want to try to splurge to get those cards, because then they can stay in your deck and you can keep drawing them for influence throughout the game. So that's one of the big things. The other really critical part of Misbehavin is getting access and then using your verse tokens. So each faction has 6 verse tokens that they can acquire. And you start with 1, but there's 5 more that you can get. And the alliance ones, you can see a little alliance symbol on there. They can be used in a variety of ways. They're very powerful, very useful, and they're very flexible things that you want to get. Each faction has a particular way that they can earn them, and it's on your little reference card. So if we look here, the alliance one, in order for them to earn a verse token on their turn, they have to have at least 1 untriggered character in their tableau. Now, they've got 4 characters in their starting deck, which is the most characters of any of the factions. So Serenity, for instance, they start with 2 characters in their deck. Niska, I believe, has 3 characters in their deck. Eve's Down has 1 character in their deck. So it's very easy for them to get a character in their deck. But the other part, everything, it's a two-step process for all the factions to earn verse tokens. So the other part is that they have to discard cards from their hand or untriggered cards in their tableau until they have discarded at least 2 power and 2 influence. So having to discard influence as the alliance is kind of a downer in terms of trying to get your verse tokens. Now, it is handy though that if you remember, Harkin has 2 influence and he has 3 power. So with 1 card, if you have another character, let's say you've got the radio operator in your tableau, you can just discard Harkin from your hand or from your tableau, and then boom, you've earned a verse token. But like I said, I mentioned before, I like to get those shiny cards. That's 2 influence. Discarding a supply card doesn't make it return to the supply. It only returns to the supply when you play it to your display area. So you can discard those shiny cards when you've got a character in play, and then you have a number of other cards that have power. So like Agent McGinnis has 2 power. So you could discard him, or the Tohoku class cruiser has 3 power. Or you could discard, you know, a couple of your core space cards or a couple of your other characters. Your 2 Marines, that's 2 power. So discarding 2 power is much easier to do than discarding 2 influence. So that's what they need to do in order to earn a verse token on their turn. You can only earn 1 on your turn in this manner. You can get them for winning fights, and there's a couple other cards that can give you verse tokens. But by and large, you're going to be wanting to do this thing right here at the top of your reference card and get those verse tokens. So what are they used for? Well, each faction also has a unique list of ways to spend verse tokens. Some things will be common between them, like retaining cards and replaying maneuvers. Everyone can do that. But some of the other ones, it's slightly different, either what you can do or how much it costs. So for 2 verse tokens, they can spend that to have another activation. That means they could play another card on their turn, or they could play a card and pick a fight, or pick 2 fights, or make 2 deals. There's a lot of different ways you can use activations. So they're really important and terribly useful if you can do more than 1 on a turn. So you can basically buy additional activations with your verse tokens. But if you look at the back of each of these Alliance verse tokens, it says warrant issued. And that is a unique thing that the Alliance can do. They can spend 2 verse tokens to issue a warrant, and you use one of the tokens that you just spent as a warrant marker that you place on a character in someone else's tableau. So let's say that Serenity's in the game and they've got Malcolm in their tableau. The Alliance spends their 2 verse tokens and they can put a warrant on Malcolm. And what does that mean? It means that he cannot be used for anything. Can't be used for his ability, can't be used for his influence, can't be used in a fight until he gets that warrant off. How do you get a warrant off? Well, on Serenity's turn, they would have to use their 1 precious activation to make a deal, and the only thing they get out of that deal is the token is removed and returns to the supply. So they're making a deal to get the warrant removed. And again, the only way you can make a deal is by playing a card with the deal attribute. And so that is that little blue hands shaking, I guess it's white hands, shaking in a blue background. That is the deal attribute. And every faction has 1 or 2 cards that can make a deal. But again, that's on your turn. You want to use your activation to advance yourself towards your victory condition. So the warrant is a great way to slow other factions down, because they basically have to waste a turn not being able to do as much as they wanted to do. They can also spend 1 verse token to tax a player 1 credit or the supply for 2 credits. So it's a nice way for the Alliance to make some money. They can take some money away from another player, especially somebody who's good at making deals. Making deals lets you spend your credits as influence. So, and certain factions like Niska and Eavesdown, they have assets, mercenaries, and henchmen that can be made more powerful by spending credits. So being able to take some of their credits away, again, another useful thing that they can do. And then, of course, the other things that you can normally do. One other thing that verse tokens can be used for is certain cards in the market are going to have faction symbols on them. We'll see if I can find an example of one here real quick. Not all of the cards have them. In fact, not a whole lot of them do. But if I grab a handful of these. So here we go. So here's an example. So Tracy Smith here has the Serenity faction icon in his top corner of the card. That means that this card actually wants to be in that faction's deck. He's predisposed to wanting to be part of Serenity, which means that Serenity can spend verse tokens to get a discount on recruiting. Essentially, you're spending your verse as influence in order to recruit those characters. There are more cards in the market that have the alliance symbol, especially cards in the core space deck. But the other Tohoku class cruiser is in the Rim deck, and it has the alliance symbol on there. So if you, as the alliance, can start to accumulate several of your verse tokens, you can use those tokens to buy more expensive cards in the market that have your faction symbol in the top left corner. So that is another really useful way to leverage your verse tokens and to really get around the fact that it's harder for the alliance to get enough influence together in order to be able to recruit expensive things. Let's look at some of the other cards in their deck. So I mentioned that they have 2 Marines. So these are assets. I know that they're people, but they don't have enough personality to count as characters. They count as assets, so they'd go in your top row on there. Each of the Marines has a defensive 3. It's got 1 power. It has the fight attribute, which means that it can be used in a fight. And their ability is you add 1 plus 1 power when used in a fight with other Marines in your display area. So the Marines, when they're together, they're more powerful. So these guys, they only have 1 power on their own. But if these were both in your display area, each one of them would get one of these +1 tokens on there so that they would have 2 extra power. So that would be 4 power. There are 2 more Marines in the border deck in the market. So it's really good for the Alliance to pick up those extra Marines and add them to their deck when they come up in the marketplace, because they have the same thing, and they have a starting power of 2. So your border Marines are a little bit hardier than the core space Marines. They're already a little bit stronger, but they have that same effect. They get +1 when they're in a display area, and the only reason they're going to be in a display area is because they're in a fight. So the more Marines you have, the stronger you are in a fight as the Alliance. And that's true for everyone. If some other faction picks up the 2 border Marines, it's going to be great for them if they can get them both into a fight. And they may want to try to nab one of your Marines, so you got to be careful about that. Your Marines, they only have a 3 defense, but and if one of them's being targeted, it can't be moved into the display area to help fight for any other thing. So be a little bit careful about when you put them in your tableau, because any card in your tableau is a potential target for somebody else to nab or dispatch. Your other characters have some unique abilities. So the radio operator, his ability is discard this card from your tableau to look at the top card of any player's deck, leave it there, or discard it. Now, a lot of the cards in the game have this little lightning bolt, and that means that ability itself requires an activation. So if you had Harkin in your tableau, if you want to use his ability, you have to spend your 1 activation on your turn to do it. Anytime you play a card to your tableau, you can immediately trigger its effect as part of the same activation, which is nice. But this card doesn't have that ability, which means it doesn't cost an activation to do it. You can do it whenever you want. You can even do it on someone else's turn. So that's what's great about that guy. Agent McGinnis, on the other hand, does have a lightning bolt. So his ability requires an activation, but you can discard an untriggered card and gain credits equal to its influence. So that would either be a card in your hand, because all cards in hand are considered untriggered, or any of your cards whose effects you have not used. Anytime you trigger a card, you turn it sideways to show that it's triggered. So Agent McGinnis, you can basically trigger him, trigger some other card, or not trigger, but discard it, and then gain credits equal to its influence. So you could get 2 credits by just discarding Harkin. Now, just to be clear, you couldn't then also earn a verse token, because those are separate actions. So just be aware of that. Where's our ensign? Here he is. The ensign has also an ability, does not require an activation. Trigger this card and another card in your tableau on your turn to gain an activation. So remember, I told you that activations are really critical and useful abilities. They're great for playing multiple cards. If you have multiple activations, you could play multiple cards, which is a great way to get yourself to that victory condition of having however much power in your tableau. So the general defense value of the cards, a lot of the cards are around 4, so you can have these cards in your tableau, and they're not easy for other players to nab or dispatch. And then you've got these other abilities that you can take a hold of. And then we have their one item is the Cortex Access Device. It is a triggered item, so you'd have to spend an activation to do it, but when you do, you can look at any player's hand. So that can be really useful for knowing if somebody has enough fight in their hands to defend themselves from an attack of your own, or if they're going to be able to cancel a deal if you want to try to make a deal. So if you have those extra activations, it's worthwhile for you to spend one to look at somebody's hand in order to see whether or not it's safe to proceed with whatever it is you want to do on your turn as well. So that is basically what the different cards in the Alliance do. They've got a lot of fight at their disposal too. So the 2 Marines get in a fight. That's 4 power right there, and the Tohoku class cruiser is 3 more power. A lot of the other Alliance cards are the cards that have the Alliance symbol in their corner, are cards that can be used in a fight. So the other cruiser, Womack, a bunch of the Womack's lackeys like Skunk and Fenris, they all have fight. So the Alliance has the ability to pick up a lot of fight, which is always a good thing to have in your deck. It helps you to defend yourself when you're going for the win. And you can make trouble for other players by picking fights with them. You can earn verse tokens by winning fights. And you can take away useful cards from other players by winning fights with them as well. So I like to, in fact, it's a good strategy for all factions to go after fight cards. But if you can get some extra fight out of the cards that are cheaper for the Alliance to recruit, you should definitely go for those. So that's basically it. That's kind of a high-level overview of some of the strengths of what the Alliance deck can do. They do have that weakness, so you want to, with the influence, you want to pick up more influence cards if you can. But shinies are always great to have in the deck. And remember, you can discard them with impunity in order to earn those verse tokens. So get those in there. I like to get a nice machine if I've earned a bunch of the verse tokens. And so then I can steal credits or put out warrants whenever I need to slow the other people down. You put a warrant on somebody, and then you pick a fight with them, and the warrant goes on one of their best fighting characters. Like Mal has 2 power in a fight. You put a warrant on him, and then you attack Serenity, and you're going to have a lot more success. And also, if you've looked at their hand and seen that they don't have any other good fight cards in their hand, now's the time to strike. You maybe take Serenity away from the Serenity faction, and now they're really hurting, and you've got control over what's going on for them. All right, that is it for this video. I'll be doing some other videos on the other factions and other elements of Misbehavin now that it's finally available. We are doing some demos and teaching people how to play Misbehavin on Tabletop Simulator. So join our Future Pastimes Discord, and we'll get you signed up to do a demo, learn how to play the game, see if it's right for you. It should be. If you like Firefly, you should really like this game. It is it's very immersive in the whole Firefly IP. It touches on so many great details from the show, and it's a very fast-paced game. You can play a game in about an hour, depending on the number of players. Even with 4 players, it's not that much more than an hour, especially once you know the game and you're not having to read every card that comes up multiple times. Get familiar with the cards, and you're blowing through those games pretty fast. And yeah, super enjoyable. If you have any questions, let us know, and we look forward to hearing from you. So thanks, everybody. Talk to you later.